Today we're examining the powerful intersection of mental health and Black women's hair. For many women, those that care for our hair create sanctuaries of self-care, community, and healing. Often, hair care specialists and their salons serve as safe havens where conversations flow and Black women's mental health is being nurtured. Today, we speak with the hair psychologist, Dr. Afiya Mbilishaka, a clinical psychologist and hairstylist. She's also the creator of PsychoHairapy, and through this, she trains hair care professionals to administer mental health first aid. Dr. Mbilishaka is an alumni of University of Pennsylvania and Howard University. Today, she's sharing with us her research examining the therapeutic power of Black women's hair and the crucial role that hair spaces play in fostering mental health.
First of all, your title is brilliant, the hair psychologist. And from a career branding position, but even so as a Black woman, I fully understand the psychological importance given to hair. Can you tell me a little bit about your journey and how you came up with this name, the hair psychologist, for yourself?
I was actually given the name hair psychologist by the community. I've always loved doing hair. I was my family's hairstylist. And so I have lots of memories of being at family cookouts and having a lawn chair and styling my relatives' hair, my little cousins, my auntie's hair. And when I went to college, I continued doing that. I had a little mini pop-up hair salon in my dorm room at the University of Pennsylvania. And so I was known in the W.E.B. Du Bois College House as one of the hairstylists. I think people came to me specifically because I didn't charge anyone. I just was doing free hair because I love the conversations. I love the conversations that happened. And I felt like I knew everything that was happening on that campus, especially amongst the Black students, because I knew who was dating who, I knew who was doing well in school. I knew all the And so then I remember deciding to major in psychology and talking to my aunt on the phone one day. She's now an ancestor. And I remember telling her my dilemma. Should I go on to study psychology or hair after I graduate? And she said, well, why can't you do both? Now, I don't think she was telling me to do both at the same exact time, but that's the way I interpreted it and thought, I could do hair and psychology together. And so really telling that story over and over, and then training hairstylists and barbers and mental health first aid techniques and posting a lot on social media, that when I was going out places, people came up to me and said, are you the hair psychologist? And I would pause and say, yes. So I think that was even how I was labeled by the community. And this is only recently that I've been using that identity or pronoun or however descriptor of myself, because that's how the community was labeling me. And I felt like it was pretty accurate.
And I think it's important to highlight, and you kind of told in the story that you went to an Ivy League school, but you also went to an HBCU, and you're actually trained as a therapist, even though you also do research. And then you're also a natural hairstylist. So these are really important integrating identities for what you're doing. How does this kind of background and training inform your work as a researcher?
Well, I do identify as a multi-hyphenate. I got that concept from Issa Rae because she's writing, acting, and doing all this stuff in between and producing.
Right.
And so I think that I get to have the opportunity to have an authentic engagement with the community, because I've had the opportunity to observe the conversations that happen in a hair salon. So I worked for several years at N Natural Hair Studio in Silver Spring, Maryland. So it's right outside of Washington, D.C. And then I've had my private practice for almost 10 years and had lots of training before that. And I was noticing that these stories that come up in therapy sessions and in the hair salon mirror each other. So recognizing, wait, do hairstylists actually have the 10 years of experience and training that I had in order to engage in these therapeutic conversations or to be a good active listener? And so how I translated that into research is that I conducted something called the Hair Health and Heritage Study, where I had my research lab students go to about 70 or so hair salons and barbershops in the Washington, D.C. area and interview people in that space. So recognizing that this was a way to authentically engage Black people in research and also to understand the conversations that are happening in their natural environments, right? Because I think what happens sometimes in the therapy office, people are taking the train, driving, taking an Uber, whatever, forever to get to my office, and they're kind of taken out of their environment. And maybe the conversations shift a little bit, but it makes me think about we don't heal in isolation and how critical then those conversations are in the hair salon or barbershop. So by having those backgrounds and trainings, that directly influence the questions that I would ask participants, or even developing certain methodologies around storytelling.
As a Black woman, I fully understand the importance of hair psychology. I mean, it affects your everyday life, everything. But can you break down why this is the truth for Black women that some listeners might not understand? Why is hair so integrated into Black women's psychological well-being?
So I definitely believe that our hair is a complex language system, and there are certain terms and keywords and how we express ourselves through our hair that shows who we are. I think that there is definitely a hyper observation and surveillance of Black women and their hairstyles, especially when it comes to natural hair. There is this white ideal of beauty that is conditioned within Black women in particular to have long, straight hair, where our hair doesn't usually grow like that. Our hair tends to grow up and not down. It defies gravity. And so our hair and its natural texture is inherently a form of resistance to this white global terrorism that happens on an aesthetic level. I think that hair is oftentimes associated with femininity and especially hair length. And so when there is that filter put over beauty, that I think that it particularly attacks Black women in our aesthetics. So there has to be this internal processing and level of self-acceptance that is part of our psychological journey to truly accept and love everything about ourselves top down.
One of your papers that I read, Don't Get It Twisted, great title, Untangling the Psychology of Hair Discrimination Within Black Communities, which I love because you have the colloquialism, don't get it twisted, and it has this double meaning. But one of the things that you state that I really liked was that hair discrimination is a social injustice. Can you unpackage what you mean by that?
Yes. So there are so many institutionalized policies around dress codes, and particularly related to hair, where people literally are denied jobs or entrance into school because of having a certain hairstyle. And so we know that, with the Civil Rights Act, that racism is considered illegal in the United States, but there was this loophole that hair was not included in that conversation. But we know that hair is a part of our racial phenotype, and that could be used to then control and treat people unfairly. And so I think that this has been hair discrimination ultimately is a way to control Black bodies, literally income, education, and those factors. And so that a lot of my work is confronting hair discrimination that is even within our communities that gets then perpetuated outside of it as well.
That was perfect, because I wanted to actually talk about this debate that we often have among Black women about natural hair, chemically treated hair, weaves or wigs. And it often seems like it's a divisive discussion, but the reality is the reason why women choose one or all of these approaches is really complex. You've done a lot of research on Black women's reasons for using these various hair choices. Can you share with us what are some of the nuanced meanings around these practices that have to be considered for Black women when they're making choices with their hair?
Yes, absolutely. I definitely want to highlight the role of capitalism in our hair choices. I had an article in the Journal of Black Psychology that was focused on early chemical relaxer experiences. Why people end up getting a perm, as we say to begin with, is oftentimes not their choice. The number one reason that Black women reported having a chemical relaxer was that their mother made the decision, and specifically because it was easier to care for their hair, that it was more, quote unquote, manageable. And ultimately became a rites of passage into adulthood, or that you were grown enough to have this hairstyle. And so a lot of people actually did not know what their hair actually looked like through adulthood until maybe they did a big chop or transitioned slowly to having natural hair or never did it at all. And so I definitely think this is my bias. I think all Black women want to look good. I think that's part of our African culture. We want to look fly. But I think we're not necessarily in control all the time of what looking good is. And so if we're given some sort of narrow criteria of what that is, some of us conform to that, again, depending on where we are in our self-knowledge and understanding our hair and these different things. But I definitely think we're incentivized to look good and culturally, and it's a good thing to want to look good. But again, to be mindful of who controls the images that we're trying to replicate.
You just said the big chop. Maybe you can explain what the big chop is, because I remember my big chop.
Yes. So the big chop is basically coming to a decision that you are no longer going to chemically relax, or even some people heat straighten your hair. And so that there can sometimes be a demarcation between the hair that has been chemically or heat damaged and the natural hair. And so there's a line and you just cut it all off. You cut it off and it starts this journey. I actually have an unpublished manuscript that goes through the stages and processes to make that decision using the trans-theoretical model of change. So we know this is pre-contemplation, contemplation, preparation, action, maintenance, and some people have relapse, right? Getting
Absolutely
going through that cycle. And so I think that the same thing applies to that natural hair journey and understanding that we've done certain things that aren't necessarily healthy to our bodies and wanting to have a healthier approach.
I really appreciate that you center applied research. And this is really evidence in one of your papers too, the Black Lives and Story Matters, Race Narrative Therapy in Black Hair Care Spaces. And what I like about that is that you really center the intersecting importance of hair spaces and storytelling. And one of the central concepts you discuss is race narrative therapy techniques. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes. So at Howard University, I was trained in a personality psychology research lab. Even though I'm a clinical psychologist, my advisor was in personality. And so she loved all things narrative. And so there are lots of Eurocentric clinicians like White and Epstein in Australia who developed something called narrative therapy. And ultimately, it is a process of taking people through a storytelling journey where they begin to externalize a problem. Sometimes we own our issue, but looking at the broader social and cultural dynamics that influence how we see ourselves and the stories that we tell ourselves. Because they're Australian, white Australians, they don't know the Black woman experience or Black male experience. And so I was able to apply some of their techniques, but specifically around racial experiences. So my advisor, Dr. Cynthia Winston Proctor at Howard University, had developed something called the guided race autobiography. And so the guided race autobiography was a storytelling technique, ultimately of getting someone's earliest memory of race, an adolescent memory, a turning point, a high point, a low point, all related to racial experiences. And so since my advisor was a personality person, she could make all these psychological profiles, but she recruited me specifically as a clinical psychology student to then come up with techniques to then basically integrate White and Epstein's work, who are known for narrative psychology, and her work of guided race autobiography. And so collecting the stories, but then being able to process them, to go through and talk about feelings, right? I think that that's even a part that has been missing from some of the racial identity measures, that they don't always talk about more than pride, but we know that there are so many feelings. And so a big part is processing, because once you understand feelings, you can understand needs and actions. And so when someone's feeling extremely angry about a racial experience, we know then that means a boundary was crossed, an expectation was not met. And what do they need? Ultimately, they need to feel protected, new boundaries. And so how to work through and get that sense of protection and boundaries further. So for any emotion to be able to work through that, whether someone was extremely afraid and had extreme fear, that means they weren't feeling safe. So what's the step now to process that feeling is what can bring more safety. So all these different factors and working through feelings related to race.
in that work, you focused also on the importance of hair care spaces for men's mental health. Can you discuss some of your findings around Black men's experiences in barbershops and how it differed or was the same for Black women?
Yes, yes. So it's funny. Sometimes people think psychotherapy is only for women. I don't even know if I define what psychotherapy is, but I'll say that psychotherapy is using hair as an entry point into mental health care. And so in doing research in the barbershop space, that I think that men actually have to negotiate the meaning of hair more. Men go to barbershops more frequently than women go to hair salons. I think especially because of facial hair and the conversations that they have. It's a much shorter service, but they spend a lot of time there. And so what I noticed in 2 articles I have published around Black men in barbershops is one, there's so many rituals that they engage in. I don't know all the rituals because I know the barbershop is the Black man's country club and I can't have access to everything that happens there. But there's a lot of paternal father, son, uncle, grandfather dynamic. A lot of times people grow up and it is a relative, even if he's a barber who's cutting the hair, or that basically the barbershop becomes family. So having some of these rituals that are involved. But also there's a level of racial socialization that's happening amongst Black men in the barbershop. That was a big part of it in terms of being taught how to carry themselves, how to speak a certain way, how to be mindful of certain predators within the community, negotiating police brutality, all these conversations that were basically preparing Black men to enter into this larger world. So that's a lot of the data that was coming up, and even some criticism and critiques in that space that were harsh to other Black men as well. So it wasn't always a positive experience, but that is a unique cultural space for Black men.
I'm glad you brought up psychotherapy. That's a program you created, and it's been really successful. I want you to share with us how you came up with the program and how it works.
Yes. So going back to my college days, that was the birth of psychotherapy in terms of really thinking about how these concepts of hair care and mental health care go together. What the current training model looks like is that I train hairstylists and barbers and even therapists, that connection between hair and mental health. So it's connected to 3 modules that I take people through. The first module, I go into thousands of years of hair history. I think it's so critical that hairstylists and therapists understand the historical significance of hair and how hair has always been used for healing purposes.
Absolutely.
I go through the second module, which is focused on the signs and symptoms of mental illness that can show up in the chair, or specifically even in communities of color, to be mindful that books like the DSM, which is focused on diagnosing people, doesn't necessarily directly translate to the lived experience of Black folks. Going into the physical expression and the emotional expression of certain psychological concerns. And then finally, I get into this concept of psychotherapy skills, which are ultimately micro-counseling skills in terms of how to assess someone for harm, how to engage in active listening. Sometimes I think some stylists and barbers lean into advice giving, where they're not fully listening to the full story. How to refer someone to a therapist. So that's even a big part of psychotherapy. I like to link therapists to hair care professionals so that they're in community with each other. So just how to get someone and encourage them to seek professional support outside of the salon or barbershop space as well.
How does someone get trained or become certified in this?
Well, they can go to my website, which is psychotherapy.org. And something very exciting is happening. I'm now offering asynchronous classes. Before, people had to meet with me in person or would have a whole Zoom session, but I'm mindful of how busy people's schedules are. So there's a way to just sign up for classes and immediately start taking them, and then having opportunities to meet up in person. For example, November, I think it's 3rd and 4th of 2025, I'm having this whole amazing comprehensive in-person training at Tulane University with one of my mentors, Dr. Marva Lewis, who developed something called Talk, Touch, and Listen while hair combing. And so we are combining our forces and doing this all out continuing education, certification for people in multiple modalities of using hair and mental health together.
And we'll make sure we put information about that event, and also your certification is on the episode page for this podcast. In your private practice as a clinician, how are these hair issues coming up? What are you hearing about? What kinds of stories seem to be really salient for Black women?
The hair topic comes up a lot as a therapist. It's a big part of negotiating who someone is, how they show up, how they think they look professionally or in attracting a mate. These conversations are actually really relevant to hair. All clinicians, the first time we ever meet a client, we have to do something called a mental status exam. And in a mental status exam, we're ultimately assessing the way that someone presents, how their skin looks, how they're dressed, how their hair looks is actually a part of our assessment. And so I notice as a clinician when hair is starting to shift or change, I wonder what's going on in someone's life. I know I've had a client who had locks for several years, and then the next session she came and had a blonde pixie cut. I'm like, what is going on? And so she's like, I had a change. And so we had to process that. But I could tell that she had a change based on the hairstyle she was wearing in that session that completely looked different from years of us working together. So, or even getting braids or things like that, or negotiation or hair loss. About 47% of Black women experience hair loss at some point in their lifetime. And so that comes up in terms of even going through a grief and loss process sometimes, and that changing and shifting of their identity.
So as a Black woman, educator, therapist, researcher, what's your next big thing? What direction are you headed in?
Ooh, okay. So I definitely see myself going more international. As it stands, psychotherapy has basically been a U.S. intervention. But as we know, that there's a whole African diaspora that could really benefit from linking healthcare, mental health care to beauty work. And Absolutely. So I'm hoping to do some traveling, whether to Europe, to the African continent, to the Caribbean, South America in particular, to begin translating culturally some of these techniques to the broader, again, African diaspora. And then also rebuilding my research lab. I took a little bit of a pause and tapped out of academia for a while. I had a whole Nicole Hannah-Jones moment and some tenure concerns. And so just recently accepted a new position at a new college that I think will certainly be fertile ground to study Black women in particular at a women's college.
That was Dr. Afiya Mbilishaka discussing her research at the intersections of hair, mental health, and community intervention. To find out more about Dr. Mbilishaka, including accessing her research, community programs, and social media handles, just go to this episode's podcast page on our website. Thanks so much for tuning in. We've got plenty more exciting episodes coming your way that go deep into topics that matter to Black women and everyone who loves and supports them. Don't forget to share your thoughts and feedback in the comments wherever you stream your podcasts. We'd love to hear from you. And be sure to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, or Threads for even more conversations, updates, and behind-the-scenes content. Stay tuned, and we'll catch you next time.